We did briefly, Mark, with the sense of
Well, I'm really looking forward to tonight, guys. We're going to finish off on our report writing for a development application process. We'll touch on the bits of it again, but we're also going to start tonight on what's required in writing specifications, what's required in essentially auditing tree work, so specifying and auditing tree work. And so we'll look at reports to do that process. But a couple of blocks ago, we're going to have Scott Wilkie come and join us and answer some questions. And unfortunately got COVID, then we had a non-lineup. And so he's graciously agreed tonight to come and answer questions on the third degree, just so you get a different perspective from a different consent authority on what they might be looking for. And I think that's important to realize that there isn't one answer. And whilst we all say, oh, go to the website and have a look, they'll tell you what they want. 20 bullet points on a page does not tell you what they want. It just gives you some idea to where to start, but boy, it's lacking. And perhaps one day what we'll see is a portfolio of maybe, our 10 favorite reports with stuff edited out so you don't know who said what. And, but the dilemma is arborists just want to copy things. I want to try and make it easy. And so that's always going to be difficult. Peter, I assume we're recording. Yep, we are indeed. I can see the flashing lights. So without going any further, Mr. Wilkie, you're there, you've got your hat on. You might take your hat off because it's shading your face a fair bit. Yeah, you don't have to. Oh, no, the glare off the lights.
That's what put it on there, mate.
Yeah. So, Scott, you currently work at Hornsby Council. You've been there for a few years. Before there, you were at Auburn. And you see arborist reports for development sites. And obviously you love them. They do a great job and you couldn't be any happier with what you see. Is that the message that I get?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
Well, like you get your good, your bad, and your ugly. And I think what you touched on before, where you talked about making it easier for yourself in a report by sort of cutting and pasting, I think there's some general elements within the approach to tree management on a DA site, which are appendice type elements. And then there's the nuts and bolts, which are actually what you've seen, what you've analyzed and synthesized from the information provided to you, and what you've come up with is solutions to complex and sometimes challenging questions as to what's the best methodology to minimize tree loss and retain trees that you are keeping, and what's the right tree to remove at the right time. So some people do this well, some people do get most of the points, and then there's other people that are a little bit client focused rather than being objective about the thing. And I think the real word I would like to stress is that objectivity and removing everyone from the process other than you and the tree.
Okay, Scott, so from a scenario point of view, how do you do that when you're given a set of plans and you're told that's what we want to build and we need an arborist report? How do we as consultants communicate objectively that situation where, essentially they've made the decision about where, the footprints, the levels. Sometimes there'll be easy things that we can switch, like, move or flip the building, switch the driveway, push the pool back more, amend a path, that sort of stuff. But where the core building footprint sits, on that most significant tree, or it looks like it's going to be hard to amend and keep sufficiently away enough from a significant tree. How do we deal with that objectively?
I think the biggest challenge for every consultant and local government operator is the mentality of the representatives for their client, the builders and the architects, and whether or not they have the ability to sort of remove their own you know, well, how much coin am I going to get out of this, and start looking at it from that smarter design element, and looking at it from the perspective of, well, how many examples have we got out there in our industry, broadly speaking, that represents what we're trying to achieve? So, for example, I could take you to an RFB unit that was built, or the foundation was done about probably 4.5 to 5 years ago now. It's a 2014 DA that was approved by one of my former officers. And one of the conditions of consent was we want route mapping done just to ensure that we know roughly where structural roots are, where you're going to be doing this cut for the basement. Well, they didn't do that report. We were never supplied it. They built the basement and the tree's still standing there. And we've had major storms through the area and the trees successfully survived all of that. Now, based on, if you were to go out and look at it and look how close they've actually cut, they've gone beyond what they were supposed to do. They've done everything wrong you could imagine. And yet this tree has lost no vigor, no vitality. And I guess what it's really represented is that we work on the premise that the Australian standard gives us a circle that says it's the TPZ. And I think that the challenge for private people is to understand that it isn't always going to be symmetrical, but not to exploit the fact that it's not it's symmetrical, is that you have to take each case by case. And councils do take the broad, oh, hear me out, Mark, I know what you're probably going to jump on. And what I would like to make very clear is that councils do take a very, well, it's a circle. That area is, you know, the sacrilegious area you're not supposed to go into too often. And if you can demonstrate you can get in there safely, we'll consider it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that in what I'm seeing and what's happening in certain circumstances, it is easy to demonstrate that. And some of it's just case by case, like you're saying, Mark, and you have to treat it that way. I know that I've seen some of the situations where we've made people keep big trees that are in residential environments where they're within 3 meters of the base of the tree, and it's achievable. But it comes down to what's that client going to accept, and how good are their representatives at accepting that there's got to be a middle ground found for all parties, and it shouldn't just be the client saying, well, I don't want any trees anywhere near my house, because sometimes that's the driving factor too.
Yeah, so I will jump in and just
pull it apart by all means.
Play devil's advocate with some of the questions, and the first question, I guess, is it better to have an encroachment or no tree? You know, where do we go on that? So where, you know, I'm looking at a development going, say, 5 times from trunk diameter. It's the logical placement of the building, you know, moving it, it's going to compromise one tree or the other. Or do I go for the gambit and say, look, 5 times trunk diameter or 4 times trunk diameter on both sides, I get to keep 2 trees. Do I keep 2 trees and put some effort in, or do I go for 1 tree and lose a tree? You know, where's the balancing act?
So this is where I was sort of referring to that objectiveness, and I guess being objective and impartial is that you're gonna, you know, try, obviously someone who's a tree advocate would always try to find the way to keep all trees, but the objectivity comes in where you start looking at it and going, well, what's going to give us the best long-term outcome? Am I better off to allow a tree to go to get more, that's, say, not structurally dysfunctional, but may not necessarily be a type species or something that's got physical anomalies that over time will be challenging to manage with a house underneath it, you know, constant crane work, so on and so forth. So you might go, well, I'll remove that tree to get the other tree out. Now, local government will triage a little bit like that at times. We do look at what's going to give the best long-term outcome as well. But I guess it all comes down to the objectiveness gets hamstrung by the fact that some people, like my wife and I, we've gone to an architect to specifically design a way we want to build part of our house renovations. But the average punter that's out there is going to display homes, and they're going, well, I've just bought a subdivided block. It's got all these trees on it, and I want to drop the Castlereagh model house on there, which is the flat slab, 275 square, dual story house with the double lock-up garage and the indoor swimming pool. Now that's where what you've described before becomes a bit of a problem, because that building footprint and the design of that particular slab arrangement is completely inflexible. So the marketplace removes some of the objectivity, and then it comes down to whether the arborist can successfully negotiate some form of outcome, which obviously I can see the look on your face. It's like, you're never going to win that argument because it comes down to dollars and cents. And unfortunately, this is where we're losing out now, is the dollars and cents.
So let's go back there a step or two.
Yep.
First of all, I never know what you're going to say.
Sorry.
no, that's okay. But even when it comes to putting in a DA, you know, I might consider a tree significant, you might consider less significant, or vice versa. So there's always some lack of, and let me just ask the audience here, guys, who here, when they're writing an arborist report for a development site, sometimes thinks, well, I'm not sure what the city's going to say. You know, there's the obvious tree in the front yard that's easily retainable. The ones near the boundaries are often retainable, but there's these trees that I don't know. And in the extreme situation, Scott, where you're talking 400 square meter blocks of land and 200 square meter houses, there's, you know, we're not
providing. There's no objectivity with that. It's just a straight out, you accept it for what it is, and we're eventually going to end up in that quagmire down the track unless the state government improves its planning processes. But moving that aside,
so let's look at when there is sufficient space. Who here feels comfortable with knowing what they think is a really great tree and what they think is a tree that's not worth keeping? And obviously extremes are dead trees, dying, structurally unstable. But Owen, for example, do you ever get to the stage where you're writing that report and you're thinking, I think this, but I'm not sure what the council thinks. I don't know how they'll value this tree, whether it'll be a high retention, a low retention value. You know, do you get to that stage?
Yeah, quite often.
Yeah, I can understand why.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate enough, just with a couple of the architecture companies that I work for at the moment, they're coming to me earlier and earlier. So I'm able to get to site earlier if it's a vacant block or whatever it might be, and then guide them a bit before their design process starts. So I can say I will go out and I'll do an initial inspection, and then I'm able to say, these are what I think are your high value trees, and these ones I wouldn't really worry about because they're in dead or poor condition or whatever. So sort of we can get rid of them. That's going to give you a bit of space, which is better for me. But it's only a couple of them that are doing it, and it's only been within the last 6 months that's really started to happen. And I suppose that's because I've worked with them for a while, and they're sick of me hearing you need to get me involved earlier and earlier. So
yeah, when that happens on, that's the ideal. But even then, I still struggle. And Mitch, I asked that question. You know, are there any trees that you know the court would generally say were undesirable, or the councils? And obviously, things, if you get a healthy Camphlora, Cinnamomum Camphora, most of the way along the east coast, it's not given high value. If you get a fig or a lily pilly, it's given an exceptionally high value. If you're given an endemic species, it's given an exceptionally high value, endemic to the location, not endemic to Australia. So if you're in Sydney, blue gum high forest, you've got a blue gum. If you're out in your end of the world, Mick, you've got your corimbias and whatever it might be. Those local species seem to be given higher priority. But then I recall going back quite a number of years ago, about 15 years or so ago, being in a land environment court, Scott, in your very council area, blue gum high forest, remnant trees, regrowth, but still remnant species. And I remember the commissioner saying, I don't care what it is, I will never allow you to build a house underneath a big Sydney blue gum, which, you know, sterilised a huge portion of this block. My suggestion was build an appropriately engineered house underneath, you know, metal roof, still keep the trussing for a tile roof, and, you know, the likelihood of the whole thing going through your house is pretty low. The likelihood you're going to get a branch dent the roof is high, and you get it repaired.
Yeah, it's interesting you use that example, Mark. I had a land of environment court case, had a commissioner walk in on site, and the first thing he said when he looked at the tree next to the property where they wanted to put the subdivided house down the track, you want to subdivide and eventually someone's got to build underneath this. And there was a 40-meter blue gum next to the koala park. And I think you've hit on something that's really something that I think gets lost a bit in what we're doing as arborists, both in local government and in the consultancy field, is that exactly that is what is a council going to see is this, you know, a tree that's of merit to retain. And I think we all acknowledge that there's dead trees that are going to be considered as an exempt sort of almost straight off the bat. And then there's trees that are poor condition, they're going to be considered straight off the bat. And then you've got your trees that have got, they pass the VTA every time. And I think to a certain degree, take the word significant out of it, but if they're passing the VTA and they're in good condition, they have merit to be retained. Now, the next question should be is there a scope for design amendments, employment of clever methodologies to find a way to make it work? Now, it gets back to what we were talking about before, is that, well, how are we going to triage this out? If you're going out and you're adopting the very purist view is that, well, we're not going to allow development. Well, I've been in enough court cases now where I've had the strength of the argument and I've still ended up getting rolled. It's because at the end of the day, it comes down to just one tree sometimes. Now, an example of this was, there was a proposed seniors living out at Quarry Road, Dural, went through into Land of Environment Court, had several commissioners involved, and all of them had, this big, you know, it's one of the biggest Toretta cornices I've seen in my shire to date. It was a thumper, mint condition, nothing, not 1 ounce of storm damage in it, just cracking great tree. Right where the natural water course ran, where it should be, you know, which had been all filled in by the previous farmer, ironically. And in the end, we argued, there was a blue gum we were prepared to let go because it had a few issues. In the end, we lost the Toretta cornice, and it was right, you know, because of basement cut. They didn't want to amend that basement cut. And the commissioner saw it as, well, we're going to get better planting opportunities. You're keeping remnant veg down there. And that was the triage point. So what I've learned from it is that you have that happen from time to time on site. You can't change that.
Okay, so then I guess that raises the next question for us that are in private practice is, if that's the reality, should we not be just communicating that as the reality? In other words, this is a great tree. At the moment, the plans reflect it, and, you know, unless there's a design change, the tree will need to be removed.
Yeah, and you know what, Mark, you're right. And I think that, look, I know that there's a couple of arborists out there, and that and I've worked with one of them on a few cases where they've been on the opposite side of the fence from council, and I've sat next to them in the chair, and then they've come and done a couple of jobs for me. And they've actually said that very clearly in that particular same case I was just talking about, where they've acknowledged that, you know, this is a great tree and this tree could be retained if they designed better around it. But I was brought in late, as Owen suggested before. I was brought, and you said already, brought in late to the process, and, you know, this is the design. They don't want to budge. They want their car parking spaces. They want their unit numbers to get the best outcome for them, you know. And, you know, I've had arborists do that on the private side and hold their ground, tell their client, this isn't the best outcome. You could do this and keep the tree. But if the client chooses not to move, from my perspective as a local government arborist, what I've seen is the objectivity applied by the arborist doing the report. And it really comes down to the client wishing to take on that objectivity. Doesn't mean we lose our own integrity by being objective. What it means is that we've just been honest with our client as what could be a better outcome.
Yeah. Okay.
Now,
So,
they don't necessarily,
so let me
they
ask
don't necessarily have to follow that. Sorry. Yep.
questions that run on. I'll get one question and give you an example, and again share with the group the other side of the problems. First of all, you said that, you know, you've been out to that site. They've cut closer than they should have done. They've not done what they should have done. They've typically abused their response as a responsible developer, and we all see that. And I guess the first question is, do you think developers are learning that arborists don't know crap all about stuff? Because we write, you know, you got to do this. And some of them, Scott, in the earlier days would say, oh, look, you know, 5 or 10 years time, the tree will be dead. but some of those guys have been around for 20 and 30 years, and you know as well as I do, some of those trees 20 and 30 years down the line are still.
They're still look, Mark. If you really want to pull the ball of string apart, and I think all of us have been around long enough to have seen all the big blue gums all the way down the P Highway to the Sydney Gardens, and let's face it, they were all lopped and topped for years on end. They've copped how much road amendments and ameliorations and upgrades over the years, yet major storms, they don't fall over. And I think the real thing that it tells me is that the fact that the builders out there aren't picking up on the fact that they can do things if they do it smart, and they can build closer to these big trees, and they can keep them with the RFBs. Because I've been at Hornsby now since 2013, and in that time, I rarely had these guys coming up to me going, well, I know that there's 4 developments around the corner from where this one is that have actually successfully kept this tree. I think we can do this, but we need to, and we're going to build this footprint at this size here. But the biggest issue, and the reason why a lot of councils, in particular my team, takes the position we take with some of it and encourages a little bit wider berth 9 times out of 10 is because, and I know you've experienced, all of you would have experienced this as private enterprise, is that sometimes you get a phone call. Oh, do you reckon you can come in and certify this? You were never originally engaged to be the project arborist. You've never turned up on site from day one, broken down. Okay, this is a haulage road. This is your cut line. Okay, I've got to be here on this time, this date to watch what you do and guide you so that we don't have a 20-meter tree dancing on the road verge because your excavator's got a root stuck in its jib. So like, you get what I mean? Do you get,
Hands
does
up,
that
those of you
articulate it?
Where I mean, hands up if you're inspecting more than 10% of your sites at the moment. Anyone doing 5%, 1 to 2% of your sites. You know, that's and so again, Scott, it tells you that from our side, from private consultant side, there seems to be a disconnect. You know, we're writing all this stuff.
Absolutely agree. And I think it's really challenging. I feel sorry for both of us, both our professions, like both of our trades, our crafts, because we're suffering and we get tarnished with, oh, trees are dangerous, because we're all doing this because we love trees. We're not here to make a coin, just it's a bonus side effect of doing something you love. And my perspective on it is that when you start looking at the way in which other people sort of look at things, they don't realize that 9 times out of 10 trees having issues or failures is because the people with 2 arms and 2 legs and a thing that's called a brain wander around doing stupid things that we probably shouldn't do without thinking of the next steps, you know. And you go in and you do all this hard work as a consultant to give them the best guidelines you can to follow a process that you know will ensure that the avoid, minimize, mitigate principles are being applied as a part of your craft. And then your old mate's there and he's just gone, what's this plan? It's got like red dots here and it says fence. Okay, I think the fence goes over here. And they're not really, they're trying to find a way to save themselves a buck rather than spend that $2,000 for you to site manage the site over the 6 or 12 months to build, because you're only really out there for half an hour at a time, you know.
I'm sure,
20
Scott,
minutes,
we'll
depending.
all agree. We've all seen trees protected with the minimum number of panels, which is 4 if you want it square, 3 if you want it triangular, and 2 if you're prepared to get the excavator bucket and bend them. And I've got a photograph of a 2-panel protection. Just to save, as you say, if we're talking about an area that you've shown as maybe a 4-panel by 3-panel enclosure, so something that's going to be 10 panels, that's $500. And yet I know we've all seen that reduced down to 3 panels or 4 panels. Show of hands though, just in case I've got that wrong. Okay, so there's again this disconnect. Let me ask you another disconnect, Scott, and sorry to throw, because again, Scott hasn't been prepared with any of these. He just knew that I was going to grill him.
Oh, that's all right, Mark.
Sorry, Mark,
my mind and you. Sorry, you go. Yes, Susan.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I quite often take that. How about you use some recycled stuff, guys? I don't care if you put up a permanent fence with some old wire and whatever, because of that problem. They're usually pretty good when you say, I don't care what it's built out of. I want it there. I want it permanent. I don't want anyone in there. It depends, as you say. Owen said it. It depends on who you're working with.
Yep.
Yeah, it does very much, and it depends on how they see things. But I've certainly seen some shockers in my day, and I think we all have. And I see probably more shockers than not. You know, when I used to take students out, and I think, Susan, you'll remember this, I'd take students out to have a look at tree protection sites, and it was really hard to find a good example. It was really easy to find bad examples. And I think that's probably the norm. So anyhow, my next one is this, and it happened to me very recently. I had an engineer approach me and say, look, we've got to do some work near a tree, and the city's asked for some route exploration. And I, of course, immediately did my Mark Hartley stuff, put my heels in and said, I'm not going to do it. Don't see any point. They're fig trees. And in discussion with the city, one of the things that I found is they wanted me to look at some tree sensitive designs for the footing. It's a strip footing. And I said, you know, I've asked the engineer whether they can use the same footing size, and the engineer says that's not compliant, doesn't meet engineering specs. But I went back to the engineers and said, look, the city is refusing to allow the new wall to be built unless we can either somehow or other explore and demonstrate that the roots won't be cutting us in. There's going to be hundreds of them. They're figs behind a wall, you know, it's a no-brainer deal. Or we can use the same footing. And all of a sudden, the footing that they couldn't build, they're now building. They're saying, oh, okay, it's going to be sitting out, concrete strip's going to be sitting out of the ground by 500 mils, but we can put a facade of bricks, cut bricks on it so that no one knows that it's the footing. On one side, on the street side, on the back side, we can just cover with plants and garden. Now, how do I deal, Scott, with the fact that I'm not the expert that comes up on these design things? I'm relying on them to tell me. And it seems that sometimes, again, there's a resistance from the client.
No, it's not. I know where you're going, and
Yeah,
I think the simplest way for me to explain this to you, it's academia versus experience in life. And when I say that, like my first trade was landscape, so that everyone has a bit of an idea about me. My first trade was landscape, so I've done all the naughty things you're not supposed to do to trees with bobcats, excavators, and all the other bits and pieces. But like when I deal with LAs internally, engineers internally, and I mean I will say this much: most of our engineers are pretty good at Hornsby. I was pleasantly surprised when I got there, and I guess a lot of them, a little bit like that LAs are the best example, and any LA here in the group, I'm not being rude when I say this, I don't mean to be, but what I see go on sometimes is that they're not seeing that there are alternatives because they have their own concept in their head, their own design on how it should look. They're so busy worrying about the aesthetics, they're not looking at the practicalities of the implementation and whether or not there's other aesthetic applications that can assist in achieving the end result, which is what you just described. And I know I've suggested builds like that where it's like, well, okay, well, why don't we just sit it higher? Let's do this. Let's and try and get this similar arrangement that you were just describing, and then use an alternate material to try and facade it. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's about they get lost a little bit in that. Well, I have this picture in my head that it's got to look a particular way. Does that make sense?
Sure. It's just how do I, as an arborist, how would you like me as an arborist to facilitate that? So if I've asked them, can you do this, and they've said no, how do I, as the arborist, push them? I know how you can. Obviously, you just say, no, I'm not going to allow the development. I want you to go back and do this or demonstrate this or whatever. But how do I facilitate in that process? Do you follow that?
Yeah, I do understand where you're going with that. I guess that if I was in your shoes, the simple version is this, is that, well, okay, is time money or not? If it is time is money and you want this to be more efficient, let's look at it from the council's perspective, which is clearly demonstrate you can build this and minimize, mitigate, or avoid such significant impact that in 5 years the tree does die or the tree blows over in a major storm, because the community doesn't want that outcome. So, because that's what most of us, I'd like to think in my role, are thinking, in the sense of it's about what the community expects from us.
Scott,
yep.
Sorry, have you got some standard details? Say, I throw standard some old standard details as a suggestion to the engineers, the architects, and the landscape architect, which is me. But to say, hang on, guys, there's alternate ways to doing this, and these options are available. I do that because otherwise they don't do anything.
Yeah, no, you're bang on, yeah.
But that's because I'm a landscape architect, so I've got a little bit of that design
Understanding,
side. Baronia Park, I've been working with Parramatta Council on that one, and that was same thing. You put some sort of a cover or a fascia on the beam, so it's up above the tree roots. So yeah, it's about if they're wanting that prettiness, which I agree with.
Sometimes it's not even that. They just have this. They learnt the drawing of the footing sits a particular location in the ground. That's where it's supposed to sit. And they can't get their head out of the ostrich. Well, ostrich is a great example. They've got their head in the ground going, no, what I learned at university was that this beam needs to sit on the ground or it won't work. And it's like, but does it need to sit on the ground? I mean, you're looking at how many ton of weight here that's handling side loading of what sort of material and what structural function is it actually doing? And this is the bit they seem to sometimes miss. I think some of the engineers, they get really rigid in how they approach things, because when they want to get a development over the line and you're in court, they'll tell you they can build bloody anything.
Yeah,
and it's not until the day they're doing the build.
Lintel,
yes.
To get it over a route, and it's a very simple construction. And if you're out there with the builder and you say I want that, and you go, yeah, I can do that, and it's not, as you say, you have to be there sometimes. But.
And that's the thing in like having that clever knowledge and understanding is where they always come undone, is because if you look at how some of the engineers operate, like I know from dealing with the council engineers, is that they have they got their guideline book, like you were describing before. They got their set of guidelines and rules, and they want to stay within that parameter. And it's not until you pull them outside that and go, well, hang on a minute, what's this engineered for? Oh, it's engineered for this. But if we modify it slightly, will it still achieve the outcome we want? Because that's really over engineering for that location. But because they got a set of guidelines, sometimes they try and stay within that guideline too much. It's almost like they're scared to step outside the box a little bit. Is that a best way of putting it? And I think sometimes as a consultant, that's the biggest challenge, is being able to get that relationship where they can see the picture you're talking about. And like you said, when you sat down and said, well, if you do this and this and this, it's still going to achieve the outcome that we need to minimize the impacts, whilst at the same time we can still beautify it, can make it into a feature of some kind.
I should clarify that. It depends on the size of the building, because
yeah. I know what you meant.
Story one, it ain't going to happen. Yeah.
But I guess at the end of the day, does that sort of help clarify where you're at, what you were asking, Mark, or have I made that as muddy as water?
Yeah, just a little bit of muddy water there, because I'm still trying to figure out because I'm not an engineer, I'm not a landscape architect, I'm not an architect. How I help. I mean, I can say, look, council's going to want to keep that, or council are going to want to do this, or that will be the council's preference, and that's all that I can say, really. I can't turn around and say, look, there definitely is a design solution, this is what I would do, unless I can go out and engineer that for them. I can tell them what I think would work. And I'm reliant to some extent, I think we all are reliant on the client to tell us the truth too, in the sense of them saying, look, we've looked at that, we've explored it, and it won't work. And, I've got to rely on them to a certain extent to be honest about that. And I don't know that this is the beauty. Honest about it.
No, and I think now you give me a bit more clarity. I guess from my perspective, I've been very lucky. I've got my team has very good working relationships with our engineers, and we'll actually pull that ball of string apart, and we'll actually go in I'll sit down with our engineer and all members of my team will, and go, okay, this is what they're saying they want to do. My thoughts is, I think they can do this. And I'm lucky, I've built a lot of stuff, so I've actually know what will and won't work sometimes. And I can look at some of the things and go, that's not going to work the way they think it's going to work. and it's going to end up getting modified on the day when they do it, because they're going to realize as they start to do it, oh shit, that needs to be so much longer, so much deeper, so much wider, so much closer. And the scary part is, that's what I was saying, academia versus practicality. The guys who are doing it, how many of them are actually out on site when they've done these engineering designs and actually watched the build? How many of them have been out there and actually seen what the builder is sitting there going, how the fuck do I do this when it's so narrow, when in my experience, I need to go wider, and I'm going to do that under the CC with the certifier, because it's the only way I can achieve the best outcome for the long-term structural build I'm doing. Otherwise, I'm going to be held liable for things going sideways down the track.
We certainly see it, Scott. One of the ones that we do see it in is basements in particular.
Yes, agreed.
Over excavated to get to the basement. It's okay when they're doing contiguous piling and shotcreting onto them, but when they excavate and are forming them, they always show the edge of the excavation as being a metre away from the wall. But reality is, if it's 3 meters deep, it's going to be 3 meters
There's
up.
a way. Yeah, they have to do it that way. Otherwise, they're never going to get their form in. And that's having been a guy who built stuff. I can look at some of these and go, there's another 3 meters there. Like, we've got to take, my guys are being taught that you're going to be, from me having gone out and done this sort of work in the past, it's like, well, they're going to cut here. They're not, that line's just the building line. That's not their cut line. And they never indicate their cut line. They always just say cut very elegantly on the page. And without our experience as professionals, we don't take that to the discussion. And I guess that's where making it clear with your client, maybe up front, might be a way around that. To say, look, the council knows, they know you're going to cut 3 meters closer, which is why they're going, guess what, lose car parking spaces to get the build in, because we know you're going to do this. But then it also comes back to, like you said before, what quality of tree are we looking at, and why are we retaining it in this location? And is it better to accept the loss and move forward, or modify the design, allow them to come closer to the frontage, deeper back set, because you've got a big band of trees that runs between the long-term planning all through there. I mean, we've tried to achieve that in parts of the Hornsby area leading up towards Mount Cola, but where there's a whole stand of vegetation runs around between the two allotments, and they're all zoned RFB, they're all bought. We know the builders are coming in, so we've made the setbacks 12.5 meters on the backs of all of those buildings to try and keep those trees along the fence line, because they're all big gums. We know we'll never get them in there again, but doing that allows us to actually get replacement plantings down the track that are maybe more suitable for the location.
Okay. A couple of other very quick questions, and then I'll open it up to anyone else to ask you a question if you're happy with that. First one is, what do you definitely not want to see in an arborist report for a development site? So in an arboricultural impact assessment report, what things get you to the stage you either want to put in the bin, throw it away, or just not read it?
I think it's just placement. I mean, I think if you look at what everybody knows, what the basic methodologies are going to be, and I think sometimes that's not the key essential element to what should be in a report. I guess what you really ask me is what are the key components of a report that's really important. Is one is that, well, the foreword should really be about, well, I've been engaged. This is what discussions we've had. These are the design solutions we discussed towards some of the issues we saw regarding the good trees we were going to keep. And I think one of the things that we never see, we just see this, I've been engaged by such and such, and it's just that cut and paste it. It's almost like a standardized part of your template, and everyone has it in there, and they actually don't tell council up front, well, guess what? We did actually talk about a whole range of ideas to come up with a solution. Occasionally we see it with certain people, whether that's in there, but most of the time it's very generic, and it's sort of like you've got to scroll down to find, okay, where's the data sheets? Show me your data sheets. Show me what your discussion is regarding the data you collected in the design being proposed, and then what your recommendations are, and whether or not I believe you've collected enough to be able to make good enough recommendations for the removal, as in justifying, okay, your position on what you've decided to keep and what you decide to let go, and because of these limitations that in the design process. And I think sometimes you get, I've seen 50, 60 page reports come across my desk, and some of it's like just superfluous information. I mean, most arborists, and I think you'd agree, you wouldn't be reading why you have a report, why you have to do a report. You're reading the real content, which is what data have they collected? Is it good data? Is it data that if I go out and ground truth that it's going to represent fairly and what these trees are is species and size, and whether there are the TPZs that you've applied on this are applicable, and whether or not what we are going to keep is going to get the maximum opportunity to survive and flourish in the new growing conditions. Because I mean, we've all seen trees be quite resilient. We know they're highly resilient, and a majority of what's in the Australian standard is a guideline to ensure that we give them the maximum opportunity to stay in good condition, because trees that decline, fail, or fall over or have other issues after a development, people forget about the fact that the development had an effect on it. What they focus on is that the tree's failed. Some part of it has failed or it's died, and therefore they hate trees because they're scared it'll fall on their house or kill little Johnny in the backyard. So I guess for me, my mind is that sometimes there's a bit of superfluous information, and I think we all know what that is. So I think if you were an arborist and you looked at your own report and asked yourself, I think the real question is, as an arborist, we should be asking ourselves, what is it am I putting in this report that really sells that I've looked at this, I've tried my best to try and find solutions to the real issue here, which is the right trees to be retained to find the balance in the development and environmental outcomes for the site. Does that clarify it a little bit for you,
Yeah,
Mark?
that's great. So in answering the first question, you answered the second question, which is what you want to see in it. So what you don't want to see it is a whole pile of padding and fluff.
Well, we all know that we've got certain things that are in our reports that if you yourself actually read, when you sit there and you look at it, and because we do so much through template, because, you know, you're all, you know, Chase, you got, you know, 40% of your weeks are chasing clients and getting work locked in. And then you've got to squeeze that 40% that you've been out chasing work into your 60% of writing up work. And stuff gets lost in the dialogue because you start knowing that you've got certain template bits that are just there because that's what we've all been taught when we first learned to write reports. And I'm in amongst all of that. And I guess from my perspective is the real key things that if you look at it, what the court's going to want to know is that, well, what data relating to the trees have you looked at? Not what was your methodology for the collecting of the data.
So yeah, more site specific.
Yeah, and I think that's what's relevant now, because if you've all, you know, I don't know everyone's experience, but in my experience of what's discussed in the courtroom, it's not, well, how did you go out and collect the data or the height of the tree? It's more a case of like, okay, so what species in this particular list of species did you find were the best species to retain, and why have you made that decision to force this person to do the build that you want them to do? Vice versa, or this is the reason why I've decided to keep these and let this really good tree go over here, because I've got 6 or 7 semi-mature trees that will actually end up be outperformers of this tree if we look after them right through the build. And I think that's the key to all of this is that, you know, a 50-page report, whilst it impresses a client, you know, councils are going to flip through straight to your data sheet page, then they're going to look at your discussion, then they're going to look at your recommendations, then we're going to look at what TPP have you created, and have you really put what needs to be on a TPP, because that TPP will be what I condition that are being used on the development site by the builder. Now, if you've turned around and gone, well, I've put in very clear, for example, and I know this is probably one of your other questions, Mark, for example, one of the things that I do when I amend a TPP, which I do pretty regularly, just so you all know, is that I'll go in and they'll have their fencing locations. I'll calibrate that in trapeze and make sure everything's where it's meant to be, make sure that the scaling's all right. And then I'll put in the distance from the edge of the trunk to where the fence should be set back. Because what that does is 2 things. It means that the builder has no get out of jail free card, and he's not relying on that builder to then pull out your data sheet and find what the TPZ setback is for that tree. And then it means that if our compliance team have to go out and they're walking through the site, they can walk along and just randomly pull a tape measure out and measure from the edge of the trunk to the edge of the fence to know that you've calibrated all your fencing correctly. And at the end of the day, you know, if the builder's been moving those fences around and you've been out on your site yourself, And you've turned around and certified it all, taken photos of it with a tape measure, done all your bits to protect yourself as a consultant. When council rings you up and goes, so we want to know what about your fencing? You know, you're at least in a position, particularly at this councils like Sydney and all that are far more really strict on some of these compliance elements. You can sit there and go, well, I gave them a plan in my PTPP, it measured everything out. It's all clearly demonstrated. Here, you've got the TPP. Yes, I do. I can see you said it's 6 meters from the center, from the edge of the trunk to the fence there. We measured it at 4.5. Well, I only was there yesterday and I measured it at 6 meters. So they've moved the fence. I haven't. And it all falls back on the builder then, you know? And I think they're the little tiny tweaks that, having worked closely with the manager in compliance at Hornsby, she and I have a very good working relationship. And I actually gave her some of this stuff and said, pull it apart. Tell me what you need to make your job easier, because it'll actually allow me to then make sure that that goes into every consent that goes out where I can. You know, it doesn't always happen. And some of my guys aren't really great at it because it's that whole, not enough bodies for the volume of work. Typical government, outer rim council, we're under resourced all the time for the volume of work we do. I only run a team of 5 and I only had that 5 for about 2 years now out of 8. So it was only 3 of us for a while. And
Sorry,
yeah,
Scott, to just clarify, so you're saying put a dimension on,
yeah, well, so okay, so
on the center of the tree.
I
I'm
would
happy
put,
to do that. I'm
yeah,
really-
yeah. I guess what I'm suggesting is that
Yeah.
is that, you know, when you've got, say you got your tree number 43, it's there, you've got the center of the tree there, and then you measure from that, it's an indicative measurement from the outer edge of the bark to where you want your fencing setback to be. And there's 2 things that does. One, it makes council's compliance really easy, but it also means that the guy that's the builder doesn't have to walk around with a whole report or he can have an appendices, which is literally then 2 pages, which is the listing of the species and the tree numbers, if he needs to refer to it. And the other thing is he's got the map, the plan where he knows where these fences are going to go. If he's got to then dig through your report to find what your setback is for tree number 43, I can pretty much guesstimate that unless you're out there on site to hold his hand, he ain't going to do it that way. And I've been on too many sites now where that's the case. And then you sort of go, well, who's your project arborist? And they eventually go, oh, we'll find it. Well, we'll contact him and we'll let you know. And then before you know it, you eventually get a phone call from someone who's a little bit, you know, laxed in the way they do things, and they're quite happy to walk into a job halfway through and go, yeah, I've been on site and everything was all right the other day. They must have accidentally moved it for a piece of plant when I wasn't there. And it's like, well, yeah, I can accept some of that happens, but when you have that really black and white, you know, measurement of it, I think you'll find that it makes it much easier for the council too, you know, in the grand scheme of things. You know, you just, if you think about it, you try it on a couple of plans one time, you know, you'll see what I mean. It means that if you're running a fence that goes past 6 trees, and the largest tree is obviously going to give you your setback point, you're only measuring back that 1 point, and it's just one red line that comes off the tree and an arrow with 6.5 meters on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it makes it so it's something that we started doing a few years back, and the compliance guys in particular from council found it a lot easier to deal with. They found that when they were going out on site, they found actually more regularly the builders had the fencing in the right spot.
Can I
Right.
share you, Scott? I go the other way, and I give the offset from the fence from the building, because I know.
It doesn't worry me either way you do it, but
Yeah,
the
but
reality,
yeah,
the reality is that what you're measuring realistically is that
fence is in a
if you-
particular location.
yeah, it's about that. Like, as long as it's there and it's something that gives the builder, as well as the person who does regulatory work for the council, the ability to clearly apples and apples rather than apples and oranges.
Yeah.
If there's a little bit of gray area, and I hate to paint someone with a tarred brush, but if there's a little bit of a gray area, most builders like that.
Yep.
You know, we've all like, I've built lots of stuff in my time, and I know that there's always a 20 mil fudge factor, you know, when you're working with wood, because wood moves and shifts all the time on you, you know. So you sort of like, yeah, you know, say it's doing stonework, you know, that, yep, I can fudge that there, I can do that. Then pack a little bit of sand and mud in there and that'll hold it in place, you know, because it's not taking any more than X amount of load. So I guess what I'm suggested that one of the suggestions I would make to make it far easier for my team is that what it does is it means that when we're looking at it, we can go, oh yeah, there's a consistent approach. All of that's measured out. You can benchmark it only off those 2 trees or 3 trees where the measurement points come from. You're not actually ground truthing 15 or 20 trees.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, excellent.
Oh,
Okay, Scott, you're open to
yeah, sure.
Mick wants to know if you want to see risk assessments in.
Well, okay. This is interesting. Risk assessments in reports. At the end of the day, I think it depends on 2 things. One is that the methodology. Look, we all read similar, research and literature, and we've all had a broad range of experiences industry-wise. And I guess my perspective on the whole thing is that risk assessments are very handy. It shows that the person who's been out and looked at it's considered the site, what the elements of potential risk are. But I mean, my team and I, we use QTRA. Some people either love it or hate it. Our risk manager, he's gone and done the training. He's looked at it and he loves it. At the end of the day, a risk assessment is very handy. It shows me where you're calibrated with in regards to whether you're risk averse or risk tolerant. Because at the end of the day, you can never remove all elements of chance or risk in life. And the more you understand, the more you know trees, the more tolerant you become of risk.
So Scott, I'm assuming that risk assessment you would only want on trees that you're removing or recommending removal for the risk. You don't want to see it on trees that are being retained.
No, I don't think there's an essential necessity for it on trees that have been retained. I mean, we're assuming we're talking about development point reports still, aren't we?
Yes.
I think the reality is that in general, risk assessments aren't probably the most important thing either in regards to development. I mean, once you've identified that the impacts of the proposal are so great that the tree isn't going to be able to be demonstrated to be viable at the conclusion of the process, then a risk assessment sort of becomes void. The trees being retained, I think if you're found a tree that has, for example, it's a significant tree, say a 1.8 meter or 2 meter wide gum, it's got cavities in the upper canopy, it's got a whole heap of really wonderful things going on that's allowing it to work as a bit of habitat and biodiversity element, and you're willing to retain that tree, which we often will do too if it's not going to be significantly impacted by the build, then probably you may wish to do it just as a quantifier, just to let everyone know that you've gone, well, I've looked at it, and the most likely parts, even if you break it down into track and you go, well, is it going to catastrophically fail? In other words, whole tree failure? Pretty unlikely. It could be severe, but it still ends up being low. Then you go into stem failure. Well, that's unlikely. And you move into, then you start dealing with the real stuff, which is the, small limb, dead wood, parts with cavities in it that may or may not fail. It gives us an idea that you're calibrated enough to understand that you've addressed the risk appropriately. But again, to me, with development, it's not as big an issue as trying to find the right amelioration processes to ensure that if you do keep a tree like that, it maintains that risk at the level it's at the conclusion. Does that answer it?
Yep.
Or do you want more from that or not, Mick?
Yeah,
I can't hear. Yeah, I can't hear him. That's all.
Anyone else got a question for Scott before we head on to our last bit?
Yeah, I've got one. It's just really about how's the best way to, I suppose the best way to explain it is it's an example of what I'm dealing with at the moment. It's a big multi-level unit block going up. There's a 6 meter boundary. Basically three basement levels going down for car parking. The basement's 6 meters off the boundary. There's a lot of trees around that boundary. So those basement works don't strictly make a significant encroachment into their tree protection zones, But when you consider the practicalities of undertaking construction works,
Yeah, scaffolds and everything, right?
scaffolding, and like I've got experience on those big sites, and every inch of space counts for those guys.
Yeah.
So they sent me some plans saying retain these trees. I've had to go back to them saying, look, it would be nice of you, but the practicalities of actually undertaking construction of the project of that size, we just can't keep those trees.
Okay.
Um,
So I guess I'd put it to you a couple of ways. There's a couple of ways to approach this. And it's good that you brought this up, because the development I was talking about earlier, where they cut way closer than they should have, the tree's still there and everything like that. They actually recently contacted me they've been trying to get this tree out ever since. And I've just sat there and gone, well, you've just proven it can be retained by doing what you're doing, and it's still there. And one of the issues they've raised has been branches encroaching on the building, scaffolding and everything like that. And I guess my approach to it is that if you look and consider, some of these trees, depending on the site, obviously, when you start putting a building into or in close proximity to it, you're changing the wind buffering. So all the branches that are actually on the building side, if they were the dominant wind buffering branches, well, the building's now protecting that tree. So you can prune it actually a lot harder than what most people might think you can. It's not ideal. It's not essentially maybe what this standard would allow in some instances, but it allows for you to actually take into consideration directional pruning and even bringing off scaffolds you probably normally wouldn't, because how much wind loading is it going to come from that direction of the building? I understand what you're saying, though. You're saying that there's no way in which you believe as an arborist that you can even do that. Is that correct?
yeah, it's more of the available space to give them the space that they need to work, really.
Yeah.
I mean, they want to get there, they're going to need to get scaffolding down there. They're going to have to put materials down there, or whatever they have to do just to physically get around the building and around the site. I can't see how these trees can be retained. And there's also an issue that I've encountered where in situations like these, the trees are retained, the development is approved, these trees are conditioned for retention, and then it's handed to the builder, and they're just gone, we can't keep these trees because they're in our way, essentially.
Yeah, it sounds like an oversight. Where do you normally do your work, Owen?
All over.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Is there any of these in my shire by any chance or not?
This particular one isn't. So
No, just it's an interesting thing, and I guess it's a paradigm that goes on a little bit with local government, because what happens is there's two things, and is that we have our own view on trees, and then what'll happen is you've got the local planning panels that'll wander around as an overview floating over the, or the regional planning panels, and they'll float around on some of these RFBs and they'll go, well, we think that there's a lot of big built scale here and we really want to soften it, and it'd be good if you kept conditioned to retain all these trees. And politics sometimes get involved, and some of the trees you're talking about end up getting kept. And it may not necessarily be us saying that we really want to keep them, in the sense that we think they're going to be over pruned and butchered in the process.
yeah.
So you sort of play devil's advocate and go, all right, well, we'll play the condition that they're going to keep it and then amend it down the track if we have to. Absolutely. And unfortunately, you're going to find that as we densify more and more, consultants are going to be more sometimes placed in that position, because there's now people realizing that maybe we haven't designed as well as we could have designed in our planning elements, and we've got our setbacks all wrong, and maybe we shouldn't be doing the RFBs the way we're doing. We should be going higher, narrower, rather than shorter and fatter in some of the builds. And I've said that all along in Hornsby, is that like we should just butch up and go double the size in height and make them a bit narrower than what we're doing to get that landscape softening. So, and I don't have a say in that. I'm not the head of the strategic planning team or the head of planning. I just can tell them what I think, and I'm a bit like Mark. I'll say what I think to you without thinking twice. It'll just be blah, sorry, said it. And I guess, yeah, does that help you a little bit? I understand what you're saying, and I don't think that it was
Yeah, I mean,
potentially an intentional thing, but it sounds to me like they've either had a faux pas on it and not realized what the build construction methodology would be, or
I think that the architects and maybe they think that they've got a better chance of an application being approved
absolutely, yes.
if they keep trees on the site. And it's just like, so they're saying we need to keep these trees to extent, and I'm saying, well, you kind of can't, because when it comes to doing the works, it's not going to work. So
Well, they're better off to, well, there's two things at play here. There's a combination of things, is that, and we have had this discussion as a working unit, my team and I, in that if it's zoned for RFB, so you know that area, all those allotments in that residential area are going to be conglomerated together to make residential flat buildings of 40 plus.
Yeah.
You have to accept that you're not going to get to keep everything on site. And in some sites, we've accepted that there's going to be flat, like scorched earth for some of these, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
But like there are, as I said to you before, one of the things in the DCP for our design element was to increase our setbacks at the rear, shrink them at the front more, because we identified there's a heap of remnant trees that are viable to be retained along the back frontages. And basically the two RFBs have massive big setbacks at the back to allow for those larger trees to be there, and down the track that'll provide for that. Now, on the flip side of what you're saying is that, yeah, it sounds to me like it might have been a little bit of they've kept it to suit what the council would want to see to keep the tree, just for aesthetics sake almost, to a certain degree. And unfortunately, as the consultant, that scenario there does place you in a rock and a hard place, because you're telling them straight up that you shouldn't keep it, and then they're going, but we'll get it over the line quicker if we do, you know?
Yeah.
Can I
hear it. I hear that.
Going? First suggestion is, again, the standards are a set of guidelines. They're not specific for us, but I'll often look at, particularly in front setbacks, I'll look at putting site sheds in tree protection zones. I figure that site shed gives reasonable protection. There's certainly good load bearing and load sharing services. There's the sort of typical track match stuff, and then there's industrial stuff made for temporary roads and those sort of things that will engage if they need to try and get access and use those back areas that are modular, and they pull apart at the end, so you can come in one out and pull back through.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what Owen was getting at. I think he's suggesting that based on like the width of the scaffold, when you actually mark out where everything's got to go, the scaffold's brushing on the stems of the trunks, correct?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
So where the trees are they right on the boundary, or they're like
they're basically aligned around the boundary?
Yeah, so they're not out on the boundary though. So they're not
no.
They're up against.
That's right. Yeah. The picturing, I picked it up.
The other side of that advocacy is, yeah, sure, it might not work, but at least it's kept some more space. And again, sometimes that little bit of extra space may not make a difference for those trees, but may make a difference.
Correct.
Trees that'll go in afterwards. And there's almost a sense to which, and I certainly remember doing a case with Ian English as the arborist on the other side, where we kept a tree that back in those days we said should have gone. But Ian's view was, well, if I've kept it up, then I've got space kept aside for a suitable sized tree to go back in. I think that can sometimes be a part of the process of thinking and saying, look, it's sacrificial. We might only get 5 or 10 years and they might look crappy, but at least it's kept space.
And I think, Mark, what you've touched on there is what I was talking about before, is that sometimes when you start talking about why you're recommending keeping this or doing this, or in that whole, you know, what my discussion's going to be about, what I'm trying to achieve, which is, you know, okay, yep, I acknowledge that I've agreed that this is the best plan to go forward to do the build that they want to do, and I've really wanted them to keep these sort of lesser value trees. But if you look at the size of this setback, we can actually get the same size tree in there that's going to get removed at this initial build down the track, and you can condition that, and you can put an 88B on it that they can't do this and they can't do that in the area to allow and say, oh, we want you to that it's got to be put in at a certain size and it's got to be managed for 5 years and it must reach this height at the end of 5 years. So it's safe and protected under the DCP and everything like that. And, that's, and you can have those sorts of plays and conditions. And maybe that needs to sometimes be articulated in the reports we see, so that what we're seeing is not this generic, cookie cutter report. What we're seeing is a report that's actually been thoughtfully put together and provided an information base that we can sit there and go, okay, this is the better approach than just, because we've got no guarantees as local government people that whoever's going to buy that allotment or move into that house, that the new plantings are going to survive past the first 6 months when they're pouring, hot water at the base of it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Whereas if we've already got existing trees, they're less likely to go out and mess with those trees. And if it is a bit of succession planting in amongst those, you get the outcome. So yeah, it's definitely a good way of looking at it, Mark, and I would agree with that. And I think that's probably where you need to sit with it, Owen, is that maybe that setback, yep, it's the death knell for those trees in the long term, and they have to be butchered to pieces to keep them through the build process. But it does allow you as the consulting arborist to say, look, council's probably going to eventually let these go for the strata, but let's get some succession plantings in so that in the long term we got something in a better location further back from the building, so that when the strata comes to us now, and I'll use one of the TAs, one of my staff just recently approved as an example up in Burdett Street. He's just let go 10 Cupressus macrocarpa that are on the boundary line, and these things are right on the boundary, and yet they're full mature size. They're touching the two buildings. So whilst it's frustrating during the build process, I think that the council would be, considering they've conditioned the replacement of the trees, they should be open to you being able to do suitable pruning to allow for the scaffold to go in and for you to do the build. And it's erroneous for council not to take that position on it.
Yeah.
I think I know it's not the answer you probably were hoping to hear, but I think it actually gives you a platform to be Johnny Appleseed at the same time. So you're not just giving your client the outcome you want, you're giving the community the better outcome too.
Yeah.
Because you can actually turn around and go, well, you turn around, you turn it into a double positive. Yep, okay, we've kept all these trees, and the strata down the track, people are going, oh, but they're going to be a nightmare later on. But they're going to be in such a state that the council will probably concede when you get your succession plantings, which are put further back away from the building, and you're not needing to apply every 3 years to prune branches off that are going in and tickling old mate on the veranda, or someone who's worried about their kid climbing out on the limb at night, and that's it's not the ideal world in it. But Mark's made a good point. It is something that we do sometimes consider in local government, is that, well, we'll keep this because it's going to give us a better setback, and long term down the track, do we know the tree's going to get removed eventually? Yes, we do. It's going to probably have a shortened life expectancy. Yes, we do. But we think, well, when that tree gets removed under a TA, we condition the 4-to-1 replacement, 1 canopy, 3 lower stories, and then they get a nice bit of privacy from the neighboring building. So
Any other questions for Scott? No, in the absence of any questions, I've got to go on to the next section. I just want to get a start on
that's all right. That's okay, mate.
You stay around listening. You probably want to say something.
I do, but Kate's not feeling great tonight. So, and
thanks for being with us, Scott. Most appreciated.
That's all right. I'll try, and if you want me to come back and have more of a chat and pick my brain apart and everything like that, I'm more than happy to help out and get involved, because at the end of the day, I learned from this experience as much as anyone else did. So, and I like talking about trees.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thanks for taking the time tonight.
That's okay. Nice to meet you all very briefly. I think I've met you before, Owen. You were climbing back. Yeah. We were climbing back then. I'm glad you're still doing and doing well for yourself and everything like that. And you're welcome to grab my details from Mark if anyone wants to pick my brain at another time, and give me a call. More than happy to chat. Okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
Scott.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so we are going over time and I don't want to go too much longer, but just very briefly, looking at the next type of thing, and that's a report that specifies tree work. And I'm just wondering how you'd write a set of specifications for pruning a tree. What sort of phrases might you use, just so I've got to start, and then I'll share you some very brief thoughts as to how that applies. So anyone got any thoughts how they might specify pruning work?
I can just say what I do currently is for specific branches, I'll photograph it. I'll highlight that branch to be removed. I generally give the diameter of the branch at, say, the collar or where it needs to be pruned, the height of it, what side of the canopy it's on. And then also add up the branches if there's more than one to give a percentage. And then basically say prune to the collar for whatever branch, or prune to the growth point. So
Yep. Okay, excellent. Anyone else want to be
I
bold?
just generally just say in accordance with 43.
73. Thanks. I was hoping someone would say that for me. And I guess I'll stop it at that unless someone else wants to suggest. But here's the first thing. 4373 is not a specification, it's a standard. And I have written too many times in my life, prune to the Australian standard. And of course, it's really vague because it's a set of standards as to how to do things, not what to do. And we need to know what to do. So do I still reference the Australian standard? Absolutely. But typically I would look at things, for example, some basic things, how they're going to access the tree. So no spikes to be used. No ropes run through forks, either friction saver or pulley block in, or work from an elevated work platform, or use single rope technique. Then again, looking at where the final cut's going to be, and this is where the standard would come in, I'd simply say, all cuts are to be final cuts as illustrated in the Australian standard AS 4373. So again, I'd like you between now and the next time we meet, which is a month away, to look at AS 4373 and see how would I specify things. It actually is quite clear in the standard. You should be saying things like crown cleaning, removal of dead wood, which is a horrible thing. So it should be dead branches, but that's okay. And then how do you specify that? Do you say, if you say prune tree, remove no more than 30% of the canopy, that could get you a lion's tail, or that could get you a reduction prune. A prune tree to the Australian standards could get you a pollard. Pollarding is permitted under the standard. So we need to be a little bit more familiar. If you don't have a copy of the standard, let me know and I'll send you a site where I'm pretty sure it's available to look at online, but most of us should have that standard. So how do we write a set of specifications? How do we communicate that so that they're not misunderstood? It's easy enough to write it so that it can be understood. And Owen's right that visual illustrations work really well. Unfortunately, there are times when trying to draw that up is going to be complex, rather than having somebody say, okay, I understand from the specifications that no cut is to be greater than 25 mils in diameter, or I understand that nothing more than 10% of the length is to be reduced and the final cut must be at least 1/3 the size, blah, 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 and so on. So the standard does give us some general good guidelines. It's just getting that into words that I find so difficult. And I've certainly struggled over the years to do that. And I've had several councillors sort of say, look, I need very clear pruning specifications. And when you say prune to the Australian standard, or, remove dead branches greater than 5 centimeters in diameter, that may not be clear enough. How do you want them removed? How do you want the person to climb the tree? What sort of approach will they be to it? So think about that between now and the next time. We'll start looking at putting some of those things in writing. I'll share with you some of the standard phrases that I've got, and hopefully it'll be helpful for us to discuss it and maybe collectively learn from that process. Certainly, I'll appreciate hearing those that are still doing practical work like you, Mick, being able to say, well, that doesn't communicate clearly to me, or that does. And I know that somebody like Susan, who's online with us, will definitely appreciate that, because she's not been out there doing it historically. So trying to figure out whether we are communicating well is important. And remember, that's the purpose of writing an arborist report, is to communicate clearly. So if we can get that done, that'd be great. And guys, I'll see you in a month's time or 3 weeks' time, depending on what you're up to with tips. And anything else, Peter?
That's it. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, hopefully it was an interesting night again, to see a very different perspective from a very different sort of city arborist. Not all city arborists are the same. They vary incredibly, and it's difficult because I don't like people. So the last thing I want to do is get to know them. But it really is important in some ways to get to understand at least what they're looking for.
Okay, thanks.